The conference room fell silent as the janitor set down his mop. "I'll take that bet," Evan Park said quietly, his eyes scanning the Russian contract that had stumped 6 Ivy League lawyers for 3 hours. Partner Renee Hale had just sneered. "Anyone who can translate this mess can have my entire salary." She hadn't expected the man in the gray uniform to step forward. What happened next would expose a multi-million-dollar money laundering scheme, transform a prestigious New York law firm, and prove that the most dangerous thing in any room isn't always wearing a suit. This is the story of how one father's desperate need to save his daughter accidentally saved dozens of companies from financial ruin, and how the person everyone overlooked became the one person they couldn't afford to ignore. If you're ready to see how far expertise can hide beneath a janitor's uniform, stick with me until the end. And drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels across the globe. The fluorescent lights of Whitfield and Rowe's 42nd floor conference room cast harsh shadows across the faces of 7 increasingly desperate attorneys. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and what should have been a routine contract review had devolved into barely controlled chaos. "This is impossible," James Orr muttered, running his hands through his already disheveled hair. The young associate had been at the table since 6 p.m., his third cup of coffee growing cold beside a laptop covered in sticky notes. "The syntax doesn't match any standard Russian legal framework I've studied." Sarah Kim looked up from her own screen, her designer glasses slipping down her nose. "That's because it's not standard anything. Look at paragraph 7. The incorporation language jumps between 3 different jurisdictional templates. Delaware, Cayman Islands, and is that Cyprus? Could be," Miguel Torres added without conviction. He'd been the one to bring in the Russian-English dictionary, though it had proven essentially useless. But the definitions section contradicts itself every 4 lines. At the head of the table, Renee Hale checked her Rolex for the 15th time. The 36-year-old partner had been certain this deal would close by midnight. Instead, she was staring at a 63-page document that seemed specifically designed to make no sense whatsoever. Her client, a well-dressed Russian businessman named Volkov, who went by no first name, sat in the corner with the patient smile of someone who knew exactly how confused they all were. "Ms. Hale," Volkov said smoothly, his accent thick but practiced. "Perhaps we continue tomorrow. Your team is clearly tired." Renee bristled. Tired wasn't the problem. The problem was that this joint venture agreement read like it had been written by a committee of lawyers who'd never met each other using 3 different languages and 4 different legal systems. And yet Volkov's company was offering a 7-figure retainer for ongoing international compliance work. That kind of money didn't walk away because you couldn't read a contract. "We're fine," Renee said tightly. "Sarah, try running that middle section through the translation software again." "I've run it through 6 times. The AI keeps flagging it as contextually unstable. That's not a real term. It is when the software literally can't figure out what language it's reading." James threw down his pen. "This is insane. No legitimate business documents should be this opaque. I'm starting to think—" "Don't—" Renee cut him off with a sharp look. "Don't finish that sentence." The younger attorneys exchanged glances. They all knew what James had been about to say. But accusing a potential 8-figure client of presenting fraudulent documents wasn't something you did lightly, especially not when 3 other firms had already turned down the work ostensibly for scheduling conflicts. Outside the glass walls of the conference room, Evan Park pushed his cleaning cart down the hallway. He'd learned years ago to make himself invisible during late-night meetings. The less the attorneys noticed him, the fewer awkward conversations he had to endure about why a man with his potential was mopping floors. But tonight, something made him pause. Through the glass, he could see the frustration radiating off the lawyers like heat. He recognized the body language, the slumped shoulders, the aggressive typing, the way Sarah kept removing and replacing her glasses. He'd worn that same expression countless times back when his biggest problem was decoding archaic Eastern European property law for graduate students who didn't care. 15 years. That's how long ago he'd walked away from Columbia University's comparative law program. 15 years since he'd been Dr. Evan Park, the youngest professor in the department, the specialist in linguistic analysis of international contracts. 15 years since Ivy had been diagnosed, and he'd learned that academic health insurance covered almost nothing for experimental treatments. He should keep moving, should finish the West Wing, and get home to relieve Mrs. Chen, his neighbor, who watched Ivy during his night shifts. Should stay in his lane. Instead, he found himself studying the papers scattered across the conference table. Even from the hallway, even through glass, and at an angle he could see it. The distinctive clause structure of a shell company formation document dressed up in joint venture language. The specific phrasing of a fiduciary agent clause that would legally transform the American law firm into an unwitting money laundering intermediary. He'd seen it before. Not this exact document, but its siblings, its cousins, its entire extended family tree of criminal financial instruments. Renee's voice carried through the glass, sharp with exhaustion. You know what? Anyone who can actually translate this mess and tell me what we're signing can have my entire salary. I'm serious. Because clearly, my expensive education was worthless. It was meant as bitter humor. A moment of release in a pressure cooker night. Evan set down his mop. The conference room door opened. 7 heads swiveled toward the interruption. I can help, Evan heard himself say. Renee's expression shifted from surprise to irritation in half a second. Mr. Park, we're in the middle of... I can translate the document, he said quietly. And I'll take that bet. The room went utterly silent. James recovered first. With all due respect, this requires specialized legal knowledge of international... I know, Evan interrupted. His heart was pounding, but his voice stayed level. I know exactly what it requires. May I? He gestured toward the table. Renee's eyes narrowed, cycling through emotions too quickly to track. Embarrassment that the janitor had overheard her outburst. Curiosity about his confidence. Calculation about whether this was worth humoring. Volkov's smile had frozen on his face. Fine, Renee said finally. You have 5 minutes. Impress me. Evan moved to the table, aware of every eye tracking his gray uniform. Sarah slid her laptop toward him, hesitantly, the screen displaying page 37 of the contract. He didn't touch the keyboard. Instead, he scanned the visible text, his eyes moving with a speed that made Miguel lean back in surprise. 30 seconds passed. Then 60. Well, Renee prompted. Evan looked up, and something in his expression made her sit straighter. This isn't a joint venture agreement, he said simply. It's a shell company formation document disguised as a partnership contract. Specifically, it's designed to make your firm the legal intermediary for funds flowing from a Cayman Islands entity through a Cyprus processing center into Delaware LLCs. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. That's... Sarah started, then stopped. That's not possible. We've been reading this for hours. Evan tapped the screen indicating paragraph 7. This clause here, the one about shared fiduciary responsibility for transferred capital instruments. That's not standard JV language. It's creating a legal obligation for Whitfield and Rowe to process and legitimize funds without requiring disclosure of their origin. James scrambled for his notes. But the definitions section says, the definitions section is deliberately contradictory. Evan continued, his voice still calm but gaining momentum. It's written to create legal ambiguity that would protect the actual beneficial owners in any future investigation. See how partnership assets is defined 3 different ways across 4 pages. That's not sloppy drafting, that's deliberate misdirection. Miguel found his voice. How could you possibly know that from 30 seconds of, because the linguistic pattern matches a Treasury Department case from 2023, Evan said. A Russian oligarch named Dmitry Koskov used almost identical clause structures to funnel money through 3 American law firms before the FBI caught on. The firms all claimed they had no idea they were facilitating money laundering because the contracts were so complex. He scrolled down to page 41. This section about reporting obligations. It specifically exempts the administrative partner that's you from standard disclosure requirements by defining financial transfers as internal partnership business. A federal prosecutor would call that willful blindness. Renee had gone pale. Who are you? But Evan was on a roll now, years of suppressed expertise pouring out. The routing is classic layering strategy. Cayman Islands to Cyprus allows you to exploit gaps in information sharing treaties. Cyprus to Delaware gives you U.S. legal protection while maintaining offshore opacity. And the timeline clauses, the ones about quarterly capital rebalancing, those create a legitimate-looking pattern of transfers that would take forensic accountants months to untangle. He looked directly at Volkov, who had stopped smiling entirely. The real tell is the beneficiary language. It's written to make it impossible to identify who actually owns the underlying assets. That's not how legitimate businesses structure joint ventures. That's how criminals structure money laundering operations. Volkov stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. Your janitor is making wild accusations based on linguistic forensics, Evan interrupted. Every language has patterns, legal language especially. And the patterns in this document match known money laundering instruments with 97% fidelity. You're insane, Volkov said, but his voice had lost its smoothness. Evan scrolled to the signature page. The entities listed here, Vostok Partners, LLC Mediterranean, Holdings, S.A. Beacon Delaware, Inc. I'm willing to bet that if someone checks the corporate registries, they'll find those companies were all created in the last 18 months. All have nominee directors with no actual decision-making power, and all share accounting firms that specialize in privacy-focused financial services. Sarah was already typing on her phone. 30 seconds later, her face confirmed everything. "Oh my God," she whispered. "He's right. Vostok Partners was incorporated in Cayman 14 months ago. The listed directors they're all employees of a corporate formation company." James pulled up his own research. Mediterranean Holdings uses a Cypriot law firm that's been flagged in 3 different OECD reports for facilitating tax evasion. Renee's hands were flat on the table, her knuckles white. "Mr. Volkov, I think you should leave." "You are making enormous mistake," Volkov said, his accent thickening. "This is legitimate business." "Get out," Renee said, her voice like ice. "Now, before I call building security. Or worse, before I call the FBI." For a moment, Volkov looked like he might argue. Then he grabbed his briefcase and walked out, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Nobody moved for a full 10 seconds. Then Renee turned to Evan, her expression a mixture of shock and something that might have been awe. Where did you learn to do that?" Evan felt the adrenaline starting to fade, replaced by the familiar weight of his 2 lives. "I used to teach comparative international law at Columbia, specialized in linguistic analysis of cross-border contracts. He hesitated. "I left the profession 15 years ago. Family circumstances." "Family circumstances," Miguel repeated slowly. "You walked away from academia to become a janitor because of family circumstances. My daughter has a rare autoimmune condition. The treatments aren't covered by university health insurance. This job, Whitfield and Rowe's benefits package, covers experimental protocols." The truth sat heavy in the room. Sarah looked down at her laptop. James closed his eyes. Renee stood moving around the table until she was face to face with Evan. "You just saved this firm from committing a federal crime. You just saved my career and possibly kept me out of prison." She paused. "Why didn't you say something sooner? Why didn't you tell someone what you saw?" "Because I'm the janitor," Evan said simply. Who would have listened? The answer landed like a physical blow. "I would have," Renee said quietly. "I should have. I'm sorry, Mr. Park. God, I'm so sorry." She looked around at her team. We almost signed that. We almost put our names on a money laundering operation because we were too proud to admit we didn't understand what we were reading. To be fair, Evan said, it was designed to be incomprehensible. That's the point. Complex enough to create plausible deniability. James shook his head. But you saw through it in 30 seconds. I've been reading contracts in this building for 5 years. Every night while I clean. Old habits die hard. Sarah laughed, but it sounded slightly hysterical. You've been giving yourself a free legal education while mopping our floors. Something like that. Renee pulled out her phone. I need to call the managing partner, and possibly our compliance officer. This is going to be a very long night. She paused, looking at Evan. That bet I made about my salary, I meant it. I owe you. You don't owe me anything, Evan interrupted. Just maybe have someone look at that Kazakhstan mining contract on your desk. The one with the environmental liability clauses. There's some problematic language in Section 12 about remediation responsibilities. Every lawyer in the room stared at him. You've read my Kazakhstan contract, Renee asked faintly. I read everything left on desks, Evan admitted. Is that a problem? Miguel started laughing, and once he started, he couldn't stop. Within seconds, the whole room was laughing the slightly unhinged laughter of people who've just dodged a bullet they hadn't known was coming. But as the laughter faded, Evan felt a new kind of tension building. Because Renee was looking at him with an expression he recognized from his university days. The look of someone calculating value and opportunity. Mr. Park, she said slowly, what would you say to staying after your shift ends? I think we need to have a serious conversation about your future at this firm. I need to get home to my daughter, Evan said automatically. Tomorrow then, first thing. Because what just happened in this room, this can't be a one-time thing. She looked at the scattered contract pages. We need your expertise. Whitfield and Rowe needs your expertise. I'm a janitor, Evan reminded her. Not anymore, Renee said firmly. Not if I have anything to say about it. Evan felt something shift in his chest. Hope was a dangerous thing. Hope cost money. Hope meant believing that maybe, just maybe, he could save Ivy without sacrificing every piece of himself in the process. But hope also meant risk. And risk meant exposure. And exposure meant... His phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Chen. Ivy had a rough evening. Fever spiked. She's sleeping now, but asking for you. The reminder of why he was here, why he'd spent 15 years invisible, crashed over him. I need to think about it, he said finally. Renee nodded, understanding crossing her face. Of course, but think fast, Mr. Park. Because that contract we almost signed, I'm betting Volkov has tried this same scheme with other firms. And I'm betting at least one of them didn't have someone who could read between the lines. She picked up her phone again. I'm calling the FBI tip line. We need to report this. And we need to document everything, every clause you identified, every connection you made. Will you help me do that? Evan looked around the conference room. At the lawyers who'd gone from dismissing him to depending on him in less than an hour. At the contract that could have destroyed dozens of careers. At the path that was opening in front of him, terrifying and tempting in equal measure. Yes, he heard himself say. I'll help. What he didn't say, what he couldn't say yet, was that helping meant stepping back into a world that had already broken him once. A world where expertise was power, and power had a price, and the price was always higher than you thought you could pay. But as Renee started dialing, and Sarah began documenting the shell company findings, and James pulled up the treasury case Evan had referenced, he felt something he hadn't felt in 15 years. He felt seen. The question was whether being seen would save him or destroy him. Outside the conference room windows, New York glittered in the darkness 42 floors below. Somewhere in Queens, Ivy was sleeping fitfully, her small body fighting battles no 12-year-old should have to fight. And somewhere in the city, Volkov was making phone calls, recalculating his losses, deciding what to do about the janitor who'd just cost him millions. Evan didn't know it yet, but the decision to speak up, The decision to be seen had just set in motion a chain of events that would end with arrests, federal investigations, and a complete transformation of how Whitfield and Rowe did business. But first, he had to survive the next 24 hours. Because the thing about shining a light on criminal operations is that criminals don't appreciate the illumination. And the thing about stepping out of the shadows is that everyone can finally see you, including the people you'd rather stayed blind. Renee hung up her phone. FBI wants to meet tomorrow afternoon. They're very interested in everything you just told us. She paused. They'll want you to give a full statement. Are you okay with that? Evan thought about Ivy, about medical bills, about the carefully constructed invisibility that had kept them safe and small and alive for 15 years. Then he thought about what his daughter had said to him last week, when she'd asked why he looked so sad all the time. Daddy, don't you want to use your big brain for big things anymore? Yes. He said the word feeling like jumping off a cliff. I'm okay with that. And just like that, there was no going back. The pre-dawn darkness outside Evan's studio apartment in Queens felt heavier than usual. He sat at the small kitchen table watching the clock tick toward 5 a.m., knowing he wouldn't sleep. His phone sat in front of him, the FBI agent's number already saved in his contacts. Special Agent Maria Torres had sounded both interested and skeptical when Renee had handed him the phone at 2 a.m. We'll need to verify everything, she'd said. Be ready for a long day. Evan looked toward the corner where Ivy slept behind a makeshift curtain, her breathing raspy even in rest. Mrs. Chen had left a note on the counter. Fever broke around 3. She's stable. You're a good father, Evan. Whatever you're doing, I hope it's the right thing. He wasn't sure anymore what the right thing was. At precisely 8 a.m., his phone rang. Unknown number. His hand hesitated over the screen before answering. Mr. Park. The voice was smooth-accented, but not Volkov's. You made very serious mistake last night. Evan's blood went cold. Who is this? Someone who loses money when people like you interfere in business that is not their concern. A pause. You have daughter, yes, Ivy. 12 years old. Central Queens Elementary School. Very sick girl. The threat was implicit, devastating. Evan's hand tightened on the phone. If you touch her... No, the voice interrupted, almost amused. We are not monsters. But perhaps you reconsider your statements to FBI today. Perhaps you remember you are Janitor who misunderstood complex legal documents. Yes. The line went dead. Evan sat frozen, his mind racing through scenarios each worse than the last. He could call the police, but what would he say? Someone implied a threat that wouldn't get Ivy protection. He could call the FBI early, but that might escalate things before he had any safety measures in place. Behind the curtain, Ivy stirred. Daddy? He forced his voice steady. Right here, sweetheart. She emerged wrapped in the blanket decorated with stars they'd bought at a thrift store 3 years ago. Her face was pale, but her eyes were bright. You didn't sleep again. Just thinking. The good kind of thinking or the bad kind. She'd learned to read his moods better than anyone. Evan pulled her onto his lap, careful of the bruises from her latest treatment. I'm not sure yet, he admitted. Something happened at work last night. Something big. Big good. Maybe. But big things are scary too. Ivy studied his face with the gravity of a child who'd spent too much time in hospitals. Is it the kind of scary that means we're in trouble? Or the kind of scary that means things might change? God, she was 12 going on 40. The second one, I think. Then it's okay to be scared. She leaned against his chest. Mrs. Chen says brave isn't not being scared. Brave is being scared and doing it anyway. Evan kissed the top of her head, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo. When did you get so wise? I had a good teacher. She pulled back to look at him. Are you going to do the brave thing? The question hung in the small apartment, weighted with everything unsaid. Behind it, Evan could hear the real question. Are you going to keep hiding, or are you going to be the person I need you to be? Yes, he said quietly. I'm going to do the brave thing. Good. She smiled, and for a moment, she looked like the healthy, carefree girl she should have been. Because I'm tired of you being sad all the time. By the time Evan arrived at Whitfield and Row at 9 a.m. hours before his shift normally started, the building felt different. The security guard in the lobby, Marcus, who'd barely acknowledged him for 5 years, actually stood up when he approached. Mr. Park, Marcus said, his tone transformed. Ms. Hale left word you'd be coming in early. I'm supposed to escort you directly to the 42nd floor. Evan blinked. That's not necessary, Marcus. I know the way. Protocol, sir. Marcus's emphasis on sir was unmistakable. After what happened last night, Ms. Hale wants to make sure you're safe. The word safe carried implications that made Evan's stomach tighten. You know about last night. Marcus lowered his voice as they entered the elevator. Building security got briefed at 7 a.m. We're watching for anyone matching Mr. Volkov's description or his known associates. And he hesitated. We were told to keep an eye on you. Make sure nobody bothers you. The elevator ride felt longer than usual. When the doors opened on 42, Sarah Kim was waiting in the reception area, 2 cups of coffee in her hands. You came, she said, relief evident in her voice. She handed him one of the cups. I wasn't sure you would. I said I would help. I know, but... She glanced around the empty corridor. Things got complicated after you left. Word spread. The whole firm knows something big happened, even if they don't know the details. They walked toward the conference room from last night. Inside, Renee was already there, along with 3 people Evan didn't recognize. 2 men in expensive suits, and a woman who radiated quiet authority. Mr. Park, Renee said, standing. Thank you for coming. These are senior partners Walter Whitfield, Robert Hale, my uncle, and Catherine Rowe. The founding partners. Evan's hand felt suddenly sweaty around his coffee cup. Catherine Rowe spoke first, her voice crisp. Mr. Park, we owe you an apology and our thanks. What you prevented last night could have destroyed this firm. She paused. It could have destroyed lives. We're grateful. But we're also concerned, Walter Whitfield added. He was in his 60s, silver-haired with the bearing of someone used to commanding rooms. Renee has briefed us on your background. Columbia University Comparative International Law Linguistic Analysis. Impressive credentials. Had. Evan corrected quietly. I haven't practiced in 15 years. Skills like yours don't disappear, Robert Hale said. He looked like an older, grayer version of Renee. They just wait. The question is why you've been waiting in a janitor's uniform. Evan met his gaze steadily. My daughter has a medical condition that requires expensive experimental treatment. Your benefits package covers what university insurance wouldn't. I did what I had to do. The bluntness seemed to catch them off guard. Catherine recovered first. We understand, and we want to make you an offer, but first we need to deal with the immediate situation. She pulled out a tablet, showing an email. This arrived in our general inbox at 6 a.m. It's already been forwarded to several legal publications. Evan read the screen, his chest tightening with each line. Whitfield and Rowe scandal. Janitor, falsely translates. Russian contract to claim partner's salary. Sources inside the prestigious New York law firm report that a custodial employee fabricated expertise in order to win a bet with partner Renee Hale, potentially costing the firm a major international client. Questions being raised about due diligence and professional standards. It's already out there, Renee said, her voice tight with anger. 3 legal blogs picked it up. The story's been twisted to make you look like a con artist and me look incompetent. Volkov, Evan said, or whoever he works with, discredit me before I can talk to the FBI. Walter nodded grimly. That's our assessment, which puts us in a difficult position. We have to defend you publicly, Catherine said. But doing so means revealing details about the contract which tips off whoever's behind this scheme. The FBI specifically asked us to keep things quiet until after they interview you this afternoon. Robert leaned back in his chair. There's another complication. Not everyone in this firm is comfortable with how this has unfolded. The way he said it made Evan's skin prickle. Meaning, a new voice said from the doorway. Some of us think this entire situation reflects poorly on Whitfield and Rowe's reputation. A man in his 50s entered his suit immaculate, his expression cold. Renee's face went tight. Evan, this is Harrison Pierce, senior partner, head of international corporate transactions. Harrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Park, I've heard quite a bit about you in the last few hours. He looked at the other partners. I've also heard we're considering offering a consultant contract to a janitor based on one dramatic evening. Is that accurate? Harrison? Catherine started. No, let me finish. Harrison's voice was controlled, but there was steel underneath. I understand Mr. Park may have prevented us from signing a problematic contract. I appreciate that, but the solution isn't to upend our entire hiring structure and professional standards. It's to investigate how we failed to catch these issues ourselves and ensure it doesn't happen again. He saved us from committing a federal crime, Renee said, her voice sharp. Perhaps. Or perhaps he misread a legitimately complex international agreement and cost us a 7-figure client. Harrison's gaze shifted to Evan. No offense, Mr. Park, but you've been out of legal practice for 15 years. You read one contract in the middle of the night and made serious accusations. What if you're wrong? The question hit like a physical blow. Evan felt the familiar weight of doubt, the voice that had whispered to him for 15 years that he'd made the wrong choice, given up too easily, let his expertise atrophy. But then Sarah spoke up. He's not wrong. I verified everything. The shell companies, the clause patterns, the Treasury case reference, it all checks out. With respect, Sarah, you're a third-year associate, Harrison said dismissively. You're not equipped to make these determinations either. Then let the FBI make them, Walter said firmly. They'll be here in 4 hours. Until then, we proceed with caution and we support our people, all of them, regardless of their job title. Harrison's jaw tightened. I've advised 3 managing partners over 25 years. I've brought in 40% of this firm's international revenue. And I'm telling you, Walter, that going public with this story, Janitor, saves the day. Lawyers look incompetent, will damage us irreparably in the international market. So we should cover it up. Catherine's voice was dangerously quiet. I'm saying we should handle it quietly. Cooperate with the FBI if they're truly interested, but don't turn this into a media circus. Don't make heroes out of people who read one contract and got lucky. The tension in the room was suffocating. Evan realized with sudden clarity what was happening. Harrison wasn't just worried about reputation. He was worried about what else might be uncovered if people started looking too closely at international contracts. How many other deals had slipped through? How many other times had complexity been accepted as legitimate? I don't need to be a hero, Evan said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. I just need my daughter to stay healthy, but I can't unknow what I saw in that contract, and I won't lie to the FBI about it no matter what that costs me. Harrison studied him for a long moment. Very principled. I hope your principals pay your medical bills. Harrison, that's enough, Robert snapped. But the damage was done. The message was clear: cooperate and face consequences. Stay quiet. Keep your job. Keep your insurance. Keep Ivy alive. Evan's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Smart janitor knows when to clean and when to stay quiet. Choose wisely. 3 p.m. Is long time for sick girl to be alone. His hand started shaking. Renee noticed. Evan, what's wrong? He showed her the text. Her face went white. That's a threat. That's a direct threat. Catherine was already on her phone. I'm calling the FBI now. Screw the timeline. We need protection for Mr. Park and his daughter immediately. Wait, Harrison said. If we escalate this, a child is being threatened. Walter cut him off, his voice like ice. There is no but in this situation, Harrison. We escalate, we protect, and we cooperate fully. Those are our only options. Harrison's expression hardened. Fine. But when this blows up in our faces, when clients start leaving because they can't trust our discretion, remember that I warned you. He left without another word. The silence he left behind felt toxic. I should go, Evan said, standing. I need to get Ivy somewhere safe. No, Renee said firmly. You need to stay here where we have security. Tell me where Ivy is, and I'll send someone to bring her here, someone we trust. The FBI will want her in protective custody anyway, Catherine added, still on the phone. They're sending agents now, ETA 20 minutes. Everything was moving too fast. Evan felt like he was drowning. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. We're insisting. Renee's hand on his arm was gentle. You stuck your neck out for us. Now we stick ours out for you. Sarah was already grabbing her keys. I'll get Ivy. Where is she? Evan gave her the address, then called Mrs. Chen to explain. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of phone calls, hurried conversations, and mounting tension. FBI agents arrived professional and efficient, asking rapid-fire questions about the threat. Building security was doubled. Evan's small apartment was being watched by undercover officers. And through it all, Evan kept thinking about Harrison Pierce's cold eyes about the threat that had known exactly where Ivy went to school, about the media story already spreading that painted him as a fraud. When Sarah returned with Ivy, the girl took in the scene with wide eyes, the suits, the badges, the tension, and went straight to her father. The brave thing, she whispered. The brave thing, he confirmed. Special Agent Maria Torres was younger than Evan had expected. Maybe 35, with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog everything. She'd set up in one of the firm's smaller conference rooms, her partner Agent David Chen taking notes on a laptop. Mr. Park, let's start from the beginning, Torres said. Tell me everything you saw in that contract. For the next 2 hours, Evan walked through every clause, every pattern, every linguistic marker that had set off alarms. He drew diagrams showing the money flow, explained the legal precedents, referenced the Treasury case. Torres asked pointed questions, testing his knowledge, probing for weaknesses. She found none. You're certain about the connection to the Koskov case? Torres asked. 97% pattern match. The clause structure is nearly identical. We investigated Koskov for 3 years, Agent Chen said. He's currently in a Russian prison, supposedly. But his network. We've been tracking remnants for 18 months. Torres pulled out her own tablet. These shell companies you identified: Vostok Partners Mediterranean, Holdings Beacon Delaware. They're all connected to a larger network we've been monitoring. We couldn't prove criminal intent because the contracts seemed legitimate. Complex, but legitimate. That's the whole point, Evan said. Make it so complex that I didn't understand becomes a valid legal defense. Except you understood. Torres looked at him with something like respect. In 30 seconds, you saw what our forensic accountants have been trying to prove for over a year. Agent Chen leaned forward. The threat you received this morning, the mention of your daughter. That's an escalation. These people usually stay in the shadows. For them to directly threaten you means you've genuinely disrupted something significant. How comforting, Evan muttered. Torres didn't smile. We're arranging protection. But I need to know, are you willing to testify? If this goes to trial, you'll be a key witness. Your expertise, your analysis of these contracts could make or break the case. Evan thought about Ivy sitting in the next room with Sarah, probably drawing pictures to calm her nerves. Thought about 15 years of invisibility about to evaporate. Thought about Harrison Pierce's warning and that cold voice on the phone this morning. Yes, he said. I'll testify. Torres nodded. Then let's talk about what happens next. What happened next was chaos, but the productive kind. Torres and her team took possession of the original contract, documenting everything with meticulous care. They interviewed Renee Sarah James and Miguel, building a timeline of the evening. They pulled security footage showing Volkov's arrival and departure, his body language, the moment he'd realized his scheme was unraveling, and they started connecting dots. The email that went to the legal publications, Agent Chen said, around 4 p.m., showing his screen to Torres. It originated from a server in Romania, but the routing suggests it was actually sent from somewhere in Brighton Beach. Russian community in Brooklyn, Torres explained to Evan. If they're operating locally, that changes our approach. By 5 p.m., the picture had sharpened. Volkov, almost certainly not his real name, was part of a network that specialized in using American law firms as unwitting accomplices in money laundering. They'd target firms with strong international practices, present, seemingly legitimate, but impenetrably complex contracts, and exploit the lawyers' reluctance to admit they didn't understand. You're the first person who's called them out, Torres said. The first one who both understood the scheme and was willing to say something. I'm just the first janitor who happened to have a law degree, Evan corrected. No, Torres said firmly. You're the first person who was paying attention. As the FBI agents packed up their equipment, promising round-the-clock protection and asking Evan to stay available, Renee pulled him aside. We need to talk about your future here, she said. Officially. Renee, I appreciate everything, but $60,000 a year plus full benefits, the same coverage you have now. Consultant contract, not employee, so you set your own hours. Primary responsibility, reviewing international contracts for red flags before we sign them. Secondary responsibility, training our attorneys to spot what you spotted. Evan stared at her. That's incredibly generous, but I can't accept charity. It's not charity, Catherine Rowe interrupted, joining them. It's self-preservation. Do you know how much we would have lost if we'd signed that contract? Not just money, reputation, credibility, potentially our license to practice. You're worth 10 times what we're offering, but it's what our budget allows right now. There's a condition, Renee added. The FBI investigation might take months. During that time, you'll need to be available for testimony prep, depositions, possibly trial. We'll work around Ivy's schedule, but we need your commitment. Evan looked through the glass wall to where Ivy was sitting, Agent Chen showing her some kind of badge trick that made her laugh. His daughter, who'd asked him this morning if he was going to do the brave thing. I need flexibility, he said. Ivy's treatments are unpredictable. Some weeks she'll need me every day. Done, Catherine said immediately. And I want to keep some night shifts. Just a few. I've learned more cleaning these offices than I ever could sitting in them. Renee smiled. The Harrison Pierces of the world will love that. Speaking of Harrison, Evan said carefully, is he going to be a problem? The two women exchanged glances. Harrison is complicated, Catherine admitted. He's been with the firm for 25 years. He's brought in enormous revenue, but he also represents an old way of thinking that complexity equals sophistication, that questioning clients is unsophisticated. He's scared, Renee added bluntly. Scared of what happens if we start actually scrutinizing our international practice. Scared of what we might find. That night in a hotel room paid for by Whitfield and Rowe, the FBI's suggestion. Until the threat level decreased, Evan sat with Ivy and tried to explain everything that had happened. So you're not a janitor anymore, she asked. I'm still a janitor, just also a consultant. That's a weird job. I'm a weird person. She considered this. The people who threatened us, are they going to come back? Evan had promised himself he'd never lie to her, not about important things. I don't know. The FBI thinks we're safe. The firm is helping. But I can't promise nothing bad will happen. Because you did the brave thing. Because I did the brave thing, he confirmed. Ivy was quiet for a moment, tracing patterns on the hotel bedspread. I'm glad you did it anyway, even if it's scary. Why? Because you look different now. Less sad. More like... She struggled for the word. More like you. Evan pulled her close, feeling the fragility of her small frame against his chest. More like me, he repeated. I like that. His phone buzzed. A text from Renee Legal Blogs are now running correction stories. Your credentials verified. Volkov's shell companies confirmed by independent investigators. You're being vindicated in real time. Then another text from a number he didn't recognize. You made powerful enemies today, but also powerful friends. The question is, which matters more? Evan looked at his daughter already drowsy against his shoulder and realized that the question had already been answered. 15 years ago, he'd chosen her over everything else. That hadn't changed. What had changed was his understanding that protecting her didn't mean hiding. It meant being strong enough to face whatever came next together. Dad, Ivy murmured, half asleep. Tomorrow, can we go back home? Soon, sweetheart, soon. But even as he said it, Evan wondered if home would ever feel the same. Because the moment he'd set down that mop and picked up that contract, he'd crossed a threshold. There was no going back to invisibility. No returning to the comfortable shadows. The only path was forward into whatever storm was coming. And somewhere in Brighton Beach, in a nondescript office above a Russian grocery store, men were making plans. The janitor had cost them millions, had exposed their methods, had become a problem that needed solving. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that Evan Park had spent 15 years learning to be underestimated, had perfected the art of being overlooked. And now, with the full resources of a major law firm and the FBI behind him, he was about to show them what a truly dangerous thing an underestimated man could be. The game had changed. The stakes had been raised. And the next move belonged to whoever was brave enough or foolish enough to make it. 3 days after the hotel, Evan stood in a windowless FBI conference room in Lower Manhattan facing a table of federal investigators who looked like they hadn't slept since Tuesday. Special Agent Torres gestured to the whiteboard covered in his handwriting, dense with Russian phrases and legal terminology. Walk us through it again, she said. Slower this time. My colleagues from Treasury and FinCEN need to understand the linguistic markers. Evan picked up the dry erase marker, his hand steadier than it had been 72 hours ago. Behind him, 3 additional agents sat with laptops open recording everything. To his left, a linguist from the NSA watched with the intensity of someone seeing their own expertise reflected back at them. The key is understanding that legal language has rhythm. Evan began circling a phrase on the board. Every legal system develops patterns, sentence structures, clause ordering specific terminology combinations. When you mix systems deliberately, you create what I call jurisdictional static. Static, repeated Agent Marcus Webb from Treasury, a man in his 50s with skeptical eyes. You're saying the confusion is intentional. Not just intentional. Weaponized. Evan wrote 3 columns, Cayman, Cyprus, Delaware. Each jurisdiction has distinct legal frameworks. Cayman uses British Commonwealth contract structure. Cyprus blends European civil law with common law traditions. Delaware is pure American corporate. A legitimate international joint venture would pick one primary jurisdiction and reference the others as needed. He drew arrows between the columns. This contract doesn't do that. It fractures legal authority across all 3, equally creating what looks like thoroughness, but is actually camouflage. Every clause can be interpreted 3 different ways, depending on which jurisdiction's rules you apply. The NSA linguist, Dr. Sarah Patel, leaned forward. Show me the reporting obligation clause again. Evan pulled up the digital copy on the screen. Here. Administrative partners shall maintain records pursuant to applicable disclosure requirements as defined under the governing instruments of each constituent entity. Sounds reasonable, right? Except, Dr. Patel said, her eyes widening. It doesn't actually specify what those requirements are. Exactly, because applicable is undefined and governing instruments could mean the shell company's internal bylaws, which nobody outside the company has access to. It's circular. The law firm thinks they're complying because the clause exists, but they're actually complying with nothing. Agent Webb was typing rapidly. The Koskov case you mentioned 97% pattern match. Explain that. Evan had been preparing for this question since the hotel room. I created a linguistic analysis framework in graduate school, mapped the syntactic patterns of known money laundering contracts against legitimate ones. Koskov's documents had 14 distinct markers. This Volkov contract has 13 of the same markers, plus one new variation. Torres looked up sharply. New variation. The fiduciary agent clause. Koskov's version was cruder, easier to spot. This version embeds the same function inside what looks like standard indemnification language. It's evolved. The room went quiet. Dr. Patel broke the silence. That suggests the same architect, but with years of refinement. Someone learned from Koskov's mistakes. Or, Agent Chen added grimly, someone trained under the same system and improved the template. Torres stood pacing. If we're looking at an evolved methodology, there could be dozens of these contracts already signed and operational. Law firms across the country unknowingly processing dirty money. Evan felt the weight of that realization. When I was cleaning offices, I saw hundreds of international contracts. Most were legitimate. But now that I know what to look for, he trailed off, remembering specific documents, specific firms, specific late nights reading papers left on desks. We need you to consult on historical cases, Torres said. Pull contracts from the last 3 years, analyze them for these patterns. Can you do that? The magnitude of the request was staggering. That's thousands of documents. We'll pay you, Agent Webb said bluntly. Federal consultant rate. And we'll prioritize based on your risk assessment. Evan thought about the $60,000 from Whitfield and Rowe, about Ivy's medical bills that never stopped coming, about the threat still hanging over them like smoke. I need protection to continue. Not just for me, for Ivy. Already arranged, Torres confirmed. Undercover officers rotate past your apartment every 30 minutes. Her school has been briefed. The hotel is yours as long as you need it. And if this goes to trial, if I have to testify publicly, witness protection is an option, Agent Chen said carefully. But let's focus on the investigation first. The session lasted another 4 hours. Evan deconstructed clause after clause, pattern after pattern, explaining how criminal intent hid in grammatical structures and punctuation choices. By the time they finished, every agent in the room looked both enlightened and exhausted. As Evan gathered his notes, Dr. Patel approached him. What you've built, this analytical framework, it's remarkable. Have you published any of this research? I left academia before I could. Family circumstances. Your daughter, she said, understanding in her voice. Agent Torres mentioned, I'm sorry. Don't be. I'd make the same choice again. But even as he said it, Evan felt the ghost of his former life, the research that had gone unpublished, the framework that had existed only in his head for 15 years. Dr. Patel handed him a card. When this is over, call me. The NSA has a linguistics division. We could use someone with your expertise. Remote work, flexible hours, exceptional benefits. Evan pocketed the card without comment, but the offer glowed in his mind like an ember. What if there was a way to use his skills without sacrificing Ivy? What if he'd been thinking too small for too long? The press conference happened at 10 a.m. the next morning in Whitfield and Rowe's main conference room. News crews packed the space cameras, pointing at the table where Catherine Rowe, Walter Whitfield, and Renee Hale sat in expensive suits, looking simultaneously confident and contrite. Evan stood against the back wall, deliberately positioned out of camera range at Torres's suggestion. Catherine spoke first, her voice clear and authoritative. 3 days ago, Whitfield and Rowe was presented with what appeared to be a complex international joint venture agreement. During our review process, irregularities were identified that suggested the contract was not what it purported to be. A reporter shouted a question, but Catherine continued. We immediately contacted federal authorities and have been cooperating fully with their investigation. We want to make clear that Whitfield and Rowe takes our ethical obligations seriously. When we suspect criminal activity, we report it. Always. Ms. Rowe, a journalist from the Times, called out, "Sources say a janitor, not your lawyers, identified the problems. Can you comment on that?" The question hung in the air like a grenade. Catherine's expression didn't change. A member of our staff whose expertise extends beyond their job title indeed brought concerns to our attention. That person's background and qualifications are not in question. Their judgment was sound, their analysis was correct, and we're grateful they spoke up. But isn't it embarrassing, the journalist pressed, that your highly paid attorneys missed what a custodian caught? Renee leaned into her microphone. It's humbling. And it's a reminder that expertise can exist anywhere at any level of an organization. The person in question has a doctorate in comparative international law and 15 years of experience analyzing cross-border contracts. Their current job title doesn't diminish their knowledge. Another reporter jumped in. Is this person still employed as a janitor? They're now a consultant to the firm, Walter said firmly, focused on international contract review and attorney training. Which is a better use of their expertise. Can we speak with them? No, Torres said from the doorway, her FBI badge visible. This is an active federal investigation. The individual you're asking about is a witness. No further comment. The deflection was smooth, but Evan could feel the reporter's hunger. They wanted the story janitor to consultant David versus Goliath, hidden genius, vindicated. And part of him wanted to give it to them, wanted to step into the lights and say, yes, I'm here, I'm real, I matter. But Torres had been clear. Public testimony was different from public spectacle. The moment his face was on camera, he became a target in a different way. After the press conference, Evan found himself in Catherine's office, the door closed against the lingering media presence downstairs. That went better than expected, Catherine said, pouring coffee from an elaborate machine that probably cost more than Evan's monthly rent. They'll figure out it's me eventually, Evan said. Someone will leak my name. Probably. But by then, hopefully, the FBI will have made arrests. She handed him a mug. I wanted to talk to you about something else. Harrison Pierce. Evan's stomach tightened. What about him? He's been unusually quiet since this started. No objections to the FBI investigation, no complaints about the press coverage. For Harrison, that's suspicious. Catherine sat behind her desk, suddenly looking older than her 50-some years. I've been going through his recent client files, looking for patterns. And I found 3 contracts from the past 18 months that have similar complexity to the Volkov document. Not identical, but concerning. All international, all multi-jurisdictional, all signed and currently active. Evan set down his coffee carefully. You think Harrison knowingly signed dirty contracts? I think Harrison is very good at not asking questions when the retainer is large enough. Catherine pulled up a file on her computer. This one is from Kazakhstan. Mining Operation American Partnership. The environmental liability clauses are structured almost identically to the Volkov Shell Company formations. She turned the screen toward Evan. He read for 60 seconds, his trained eye catching the familiar patterns. This pushes all environmental responsibility onto the American partner. Any contamination, any regulatory fines, any cleanup costs, it all falls on the U.S. side. While the Kazakh operators retain profit rights and operational control, Catherine finished. It's brilliant in a horrifying way. The U.S. company takes all the risk, the foreign company takes all the reward. And when the inevitable environmental disaster happens, the Kazakh company dissolves, and the American partner is left holding the liability. Evan scrolled further. This could bankrupt whoever signed it. Which is why I need you to review it thoroughly. If it's as bad as I think, we need to contact the client immediately. Get them out before it's too late. Evan looked at her carefully. And Harrison? He brought this client in. Yes, and he's been adamant that we don't interfere with the contract terms. Says the client knew what they were signing. Did they? Catherine's silence was answer enough. The Kazakhstan contract consumed the next 2 days. Evan worked from a secure office at Whitfield and Row, the same floor as the partners, but isolated from regular attorney traffic. Ivy stayed at the hotel with a rotation of caregivers. Sarah volunteered for several shifts, bonding with the girl over art projects and stories about the legal world. As Evan dissected the mining contract, the scope of the trap became clearer. Clause 17 created a reporting structure that made the U.S. partner liable for Kazakh regulatory violations they'd have no way of knowing about. Clause 23 defined force majeure so narrowly that virtually any operational problem became the American company's financial responsibility. Clause 31, buried in indemnification language, made the U.S. partner responsible for all historical environmental conditions, meaning contamination that existed before they'd even signed the contract. It was predatory, surgical, and completely legal if both parties had signed with full understanding. Except Evan was certain they hadn't. On Thursday afternoon, he presented his findings to Catherine, Walter, and Renee in a private meeting. Harrison Pierce was conspicuously absent. This is worse than Volkov, Evan said, his analysis spread across the conference table. Volkov was money laundering illegal, but containable. This is legal theft. The U.S. company TerraVest Industries has signed on to unlimited environmental liability in a country with minimal oversight and maximum corruption. They're one bribe away from bankruptcy. Walter's face had gone pale. How much are we talking? Potentially hundreds of millions. Kazakhstan's environmental regulations are deliberately vague. Any local official can declare a violation, impose a fine, demand remediation. And according to this contract, TerraVest pays. Renee was already on her laptop. TerraVest is a publicly traded company. 5,000 employees. This could destroy them. We have to contact them, Catherine said. Immediately. Explain what they've signed. They won't believe us, Evan said quietly. Their own lawyers reviewed this. They'll think we're trying to sabotage Harrison's relationship, drum up more work, create problems where none exist. Then we make them believe us, Walter said firmly. He pulled out his phone. I know TerraVest's CEO, Richard Maldonado. We served on a charity board together. I'll get him to listen. The call was scheduled for Friday morning, but Thursday night, everything changed. Evan was leaving the office around 11 p.m., planning to pick up Ivy from the hotel and maybe finally return to their apartment. As he waited for the elevator, his phone rang. Torres. We have a problem, she said without preamble. Volkov was spotted at JFK 2 hours ago trying to board a flight to Moscow using a Ukrainian passport under a different name. Evan's hand tightened on his phone. We arrested him. But the passport is sophisticated diplomatic-level forgery. This isn't some small-time operation, Evan. This is connected to something much bigger. The elevator doors opened. Evan stepped in alone. What does that mean for us, for Ivy? It means increased protection. It means the investigation just got classified at a higher level. And it means... Torres paused. It means we found something when we searched his apartment. What? A list. 43 names. American lawyers all working in international corporate law. Some at major firms, some solo practitioners. 31 of them have signed contracts with shell companies in the past 3 years. Evan's mind raced. Targets or accomplices? That's what we're trying to figure out. But Evan, Harrison Pierce's name is on the list. The elevator reached the ground floor. Evan stood frozen as the doors opened, then closed again. "Say that again." Harrison Pierce, listed with a notation, reliable. Doesn't ask questions. Maximum fee tolerance. Torres's voice was grim. "We're executing a warrant on his office tomorrow morning, but I wanted to give you a heads up. This is going to get messy." Evan rode the elevator back up, his mind churning. Harrison wasn't just negligent. He was actively complicit. How many companies had he sold out? How many contracts had he pushed through, knowing they were traps? When the doors opened on 42, Harrison Pierce was standing in the hallway, clearly waiting. "Mr. Park," Harrison said pleasantly. "Working late?" Evan's heart hammered, but he kept his voice steady. "Could ask you the same thing. I had some files to retrieve, client confidentiality, you understand, before things get complicated tomorrow." Harrison's smile was cold. "Word of advice, Mr. Park. Know when to stop digging. Some holes go deeper than you want to find." Is that a threat? It's experience talking. You've stumbled into something you don't fully understand. Made yourself useful, yes. But usefulness has limits. And people who exceed those limits tend to disappear into their own irrelevance. Evan thought about Ivy, about the threats, about 15 years of staying invisible. Then he thought about Dr. Patel's card in his pocket, about Catherine's trust, about the moment he'd set down his mop and chosen to matter. "I think I understand perfectly," Evan said quietly. "You've been selling out clients for years, taking money to push through contracts you knew were dangerous. And now you're trying to intimidate me because I'm about to expose it all." Harrison's pleasant expression cracked. "You're a janitor playing lawyer. You have no idea what you're talking about. FBI seems to think I do. They're executing a warrant on your office tomorrow. Found your name on Volkov's list of reliable American lawyers. You want to talk about understanding? I understand you're going to prison." For a moment, Evan thought Harrison might actually attack him. The older man's face went red, his hands clenching into fists. Then, with visible effort, he regained control. "You self-righteous fool," Harrison hissed. "You think you're saving people. You're destroying them. TerraVest wanted that Kazakhstan deal. They knew the risks. They're adults making business decisions. But now you're going to cost them the opportunity. Cost this firm millions in fees. Cost hundreds of people their jobs, all because you need to feel important. TerraVest didn't know the risks. You hid them. I provided a contract. They had their own lawyers review it. Due diligence is their responsibility, not mine. You provided a trap," Evan shot back. "And you knew it. That's not law. That's fraud." Harrison stepped closer, lowering his voice to something dangerous. "Your daughter, Ivy Wright. 12 years old, very sick. Expensive treatments. You think Whitfield and Rowe is the only firm with good insurance. You think you can't be replaced. Keep pushing, Mr. Park, and you might find yourself back in a janitor's uniform watching your daughter suffer because you couldn't keep your mouth shut." The threat was explicit, calculated to hit exactly where Evan was most vulnerable. And it worked. For a moment he felt the old fear, the old willingness to shrink, to hide, to accept anything to keep Ivy safe. Then he remembered her question. The brave thing. "FBI's listening," Evan said calmly, tapping his shirt pocket where Torres had placed a recording device that morning. "That was a direct threat against a federal witness and a child. Congratulations, Harrison. You just added witness intimidation to whatever charges they were planning." Harrison's face went from red to white. "You're wearing a wire. Have been since Tuesday. Everything you just said recorded. Admissible. Damning." Evan pulled out his phone, showing the active connection to FBI monitoring. "And they're on their way now. So I suggest you call your lawyer. You're going to need one." Harrison ran, actually turned and ran down the hallway toward the stairwell, his expensive shoes slipping on the polished floor. He didn't make it far. FBI agents emerged from the stairwell door. He was heading for Torres, leading them. "Harrison Pierce," Torres said, badge out. "You're under arrest for witness intimidation, conspiracy to commit fraud, and whatever else we discover when we execute this warrant." She held up an official document. "You have the right to remain silent." Evan watched as they cuffed Harrison, read him his rights, led him past the elevators toward the main entrance. The man who'd threatened his daughter, who'd sold out clients for decades, who'd called him an irrelevant janitor, now just looked small and scared and defeated. Torres approached Evan after Harrison was gone. "You did good. That recording gives us leverage to flip him. He'll give up everyone else on that list to save himself. I just wanted to get Ivy home safely." "You did that too. With Harrison in custody, the immediate threat level dropped significantly." She paused. "But Evan, this is just the beginning. When this story goes fully public, when the trials start, your life is going to change in ways you can't predict." "I know." "Do you really?" Torres studied him. "You're about to become the face of this investigation. The janitor who exposed a massive fraud network. That's a powerful narrative. Inspiring. But it also makes you a symbol, and symbols can't have quiet lives." Evan thought about that, about Ivy's need for stability, about his own desire to just be a father, about the framework he'd built in his head that might help catch criminals across the country, about the choice between safety and significance. "What if," he said slowly, "I don't want to be a symbol? What if I just want to do the work?" Torres smiled slightly. "Then you're smarter than most people who end up in your position. The work matters more than the glory. Remember that when the media circus really starts." She left him alone in the hallway, the building suddenly feeling enormous and empty around him. Evan pulled out his phone and called the hotel. "Sweetheart," he said when Ivy answered. "Pack your stuff. We're going home." "Really, is it safe?" "Safe enough. And I miss our apartment. Even though it's tiny. Especially because it's tiny." Evan felt something unknot in his chest. "It's ours, and that matters." When he picked Ivy up an hour later, she had questions about Harrison, about the arrest, about what happened next. Evan answered them honestly, age-appropriately, giving her the truth she deserved. As they walked into their small apartment in Queens, Ivy immediately went to her corner and pulled out her sketchpad. "I want to draw this," she said. "Draw what?" "You in the building, because that's where everything changed, right? In that building." Evan looked at the sketch taking shape. His figure small, but central. The office tower looming above, but not threatening. In Ivy's drawing, the building looked protective, like it was watching over him, rather than containing him. "Yeah," he said softly. "That's where everything changed." His phone buzzed with a message from Walter Whitfield. TerraVest CEO agreed to meet tomorrow. "Bring your analysis. We're going to save these people from their own contract." Then another from Dr. Patel. NSA reviewed your linguistic framework. They want to talk acquisition. Serious money. Call when you can. Then Renee Harrison's files are being seized. We found 12 more questionable contracts. Need your eyes on all of them. This is going to take months. And finally, from Torres Volkov's talking. Full network exposure imminent. You started an avalanche, Evan. Hope you're ready. Evan looked at Ivy, bent over her drawing, tongue poking out in concentration. Looked at their tiny apartment with its thrift store furniture and medical equipment in the corner. Looked at the window showing Queens at midnight, ordinary and familiar and home. "Am I ready?" he murmured to himself. Ivy glanced up. "For what?" "For everything to be different." She considered this with her usual gravity. "Things are already different, Dad. Different happened when you stopped pretending to be just a janitor." "I was never pretending." "Yeah, you were. You were pretending the janitor part was all you were." She went back to her drawing. "Now you're just more. And more is good." More was terrifying. More meant exposure risk, stepping fully into a spotlight he'd spent 15 years avoiding. More meant trials and testimony and becoming the story instead of just cleaning up after other people's stories. But more also meant using the framework that had lived in his head for 15 years. Meant helping companies like TerraVest before they signed their own destruction. Meant teaching attorneys to see what he saw, to question what looked complex, just because someone wanted it to look legitimate. More meant mattering. And maybe after 15 years, he was finally ready for that. Outside somewhere in the city, federal agents were raiding offices, seizing documents, building cases that would span years. Inside, a 12-year-old girl drew pictures of her father as a hero, and Evan Park, former professor, current janitor, future consultant, began to understand that the bravest thing wasn't speaking up once. It was speaking up and then speaking up again and again every time it mattered for as long as it took. The phone rang one more time. Unknown number. Evan's hand hesitated, then answered. "Dr. Park," a heavily accented voice said. "We haven't met, but we will. This is not over." The line went dead. Evan looked at his daughter, at the life he'd built, at the small, safe world he'd created. Looked at it, and made his choice. He called Torres back. "That threat I just received, I need it traced. And I need security increased, because I'm not backing down. Whatever comes next, I'm seeing this through. Even if it gets dangerous." Evan watched Ivy add stars to her drawing, making the office building glow. Especially then, someone has to stand up. Might as well be the janitor. Torres's laugh was brief, but genuine. "Not a janitor anymore, Evan, and you never really were." Maybe that was true. Or maybe the janitor part was just as real as the lawyer part, just as important, just as necessary. Maybe cleaning floors and cleaning up fraud weren't so different after all. Both required seeing what others missed, caring about details, understanding that small things mattered. Tomorrow he'd meet TerraVest's CEO and try to save them from a contract designed to destroy them. Next week he'd testify before a federal grand jury about patterns in language that revealed criminal intent. Next month he'd maybe talk to the NSA about frameworks and systems, and ways to catch the next Volkov before they could trap the next unsuspecting law firm. But tonight, he was just a father in a small apartment in Queens, watching his daughter draw pictures of buildings and stars, and believing for the first time in 15 years that maybe everything would actually be okay. The brave thing. Every day. For as long as it took. That was the job now. And Evan Park was finally fully ready to do it. The threatening call played on loop in Evan's mind through what little remained of the night. By 6 a.m. Friday, he was already dressed, already planning, already 3 steps ahead of the fear that wanted to paralyze him. Ivy emerged from behind her curtain, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "You didn't sleep again," she observed. "Couldn't. Too much to do today." Evan poured cereal into 2 bowls, the mundane routine grounding him. "Big meeting with a company that needs help. Want to come to the office with me? Sarah said she'd hang out with you if you wanted." Ivy's face brightened. "Really? Can I bring my art stuff?" "Bring whatever you want, sweetheart." The morning felt almost normal breakfast, getting dressed, the subway ride into Manhattan. But Evan couldn't shake the awareness of the unmarked car following them. The plainclothes officer who'd been stationed outside their building since 4 a.m., the weight of his phone in his pocket with Torres on speed dial. At Whitfield and Row, the 42nd floor was already buzzing despite the early hour. Word of Harrison's arrest had spread through the firm like wildfire. Associates whispered in clusters. Partners held emergency meetings behind closed doors. The entire culture of the place felt shifted, unstable, like a building after an earthquake checking for cracks in its foundation. Walter met Evan at the elevator, his expression grave but determined. "Richard Maldonado will be here at 9. He's bringing his general counsel and chief financial officer. They're not happy about being told their contract is toxic." "They'll be less happy when Kazakhstan bankrupts them," Evan replied. He handed Ivy off to Sarah, who greeted the girl with genuine warmth and immediately started setting up an art station in an empty conference room. Catherine joined them in Walter's office, spreading the Kazakhstan contract across his desk. "I spent half the night on the phone with our insurance carrier," she said. "If TerraVest sues us for professional negligence for not catching this when Harrison brought it to us, we could be looking at a massive claim. So we have incentive to downplay the problems," Evan said, slowly understanding the trap. "Make it sound less severe than it is. Protect ourselves legally." "That's what our insurance lawyer advised," Catherine admitted. "But that's not what we're going to do. We're going to tell them the complete truth, regardless of the liability exposure." Walter nodded firmly. Harrison operated in the shadows for years because nobody wanted to shine a light on uncomfortable truths. That ends now, even if it costs us. The conviction in their voices reminded Evan why he'd taken the risk of speaking up in the first place. These weren't just corporate managers protecting the bottom line. These were people choosing integrity, even when it hurt. At 8:45, Evan's phone buzzed. Torres. That call last night traced to a burner phone in Brighton Beach. Same neighborhood as Volkov's network. We're monitoring. Stay vigilant. Then another message. This one from an email address he didn't recognize. "Your daughter is very talented. Sarah showed me her drawings. Would be shame if something happened to those small hands." Evan's blood turned to ice. He showed the message to Walter, who immediately called building security. Within minutes, federal agents were sweeping the floor, checking Sarah's conference room, verifying that Ivy was safe. She was fine, happily sketching, while Sarah read beside her, completely unaware of the threat. But the message had achieved its purpose. Evan's hands shook as he tried to focus on his notes for the TerraVest meeting. "We can postpone," Catherine said quietly, seeing his state. "No." Evan forced his breathing to steady. "That's what they want. They want me scared, distracted, unable to function. I won't give them that." At precisely 9 o'clock, Richard Maldonado walked into the conference room like a man preparing for battle. He was in his 50s, built like a former linebacker, with the aggressive confidence of someone who'd built a mid-sized mining company from nothing. His general counsel, Patricia Chen, looked equally skeptical. The CFO, Marcus Rivera, carried a copy of the Kazakhstan contract, bristling with sticky notes and annotations. "This better be good," Maldonado said without preamble. "We've got equipment shipping to Almaty next week. Contracts signed, permits filed, advance payments made. You're telling me to stop everything based on what contract language?" Evan set his analysis on the table. 30 pages of detailed breakdown, highlighted clauses, jurisdictional comparisons, and financial projections. Based on the certainty that this contract will bankrupt TerraVest within 3 years. The bluntness caught them off guard. Patricia leaned forward. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Park." "It's a serious contract." Evan opened to page 12. "This environmental liability clause makes you responsible for all contamination in the mining area, including historical contamination from Soviet-era operations. The Kazakhs know there's massive heavy metal pollution from the 1970s. They've structured this so you inherit all cleanup costs." Marcus flipped to the same page in his copy. "Our lawyers reviewed this. They said the language was standard for international mining operations." "Your lawyers were wrong, or they didn't understand the implications." Evan pulled up a map on the screen showing the mining site. This location was a uranium processing facility during the Cold War. The groundwater contamination alone could cost $500 million to remediate. And according to Clause 17, that's entirely your responsibility the moment you sign. Maldonado's face had gone pale. $500 million. Minimum. Could be more depending on how aggressive the Kazakh Environmental Ministry wants to be. And they'll be very aggressive, because Clause 23 gives them the right to impose fines for any violation of environmental standards. Standards they can change retroactively. Patricia was speed-reading the contract now, her skepticism shifting to alarm. "This can't be legal." "It's completely legal," Evan said. "That's the problem. You're signing it voluntarily. The Kazakhs aren't hiding anything. They're just hiding it in plain sight, buried in complexity, and cross-jurisdictional confusion. He walked them through it clause by clause, the same way he'd done with the FBI. The force majeure definitions that made Terravest liable for political instability in Kazakhstan. The dispute resolution clause that required arbitration in Almaty under Kazakh law. The termination provisions that let the Kazakh partners exit at any time while locking Terravest into minimum payment obligations. By the time Evan finished, Marcus had his head in his hands. Our stock price will crater when this gets out. Your stock price will crater worse when you're hit with a $1 billion environmental lawsuit in 2 years, Evan countered. Right now you can walk away. You'll lose the advance payments, maybe $20 million. That's painful, but survivable. $20 million, Maldonado repeated. You're asking me to write off $20 million based on your interpretation of contract language. I'm asking you to write off $20 million to avoid losing everything. Evan met his eyes. Mr. Maldonado, I spent 15 years invisible cleaning floors watching deals like this destroy companies. I've seen the aftermath. The bankruptcies, the layoffs, the shareholders wiped out. I can't prove with absolute certainty this will happen to you, but I can show you the pattern, and the pattern is clear. The room fell silent. Finally, Patricia spoke. Who else has reviewed this analysis? Independent counsel. FBI forensic accountants, Catherine said. They confirmed Evan's assessment. This contract matches patterns from known fraud cases. Maldonado stood abruptly, pacing to the window. We've got 5,000 employees, pension obligations, supplier contracts. I can't just walk away from $20 million on a hunch. It's not a hunch, Evan said quietly. It's 15 years of expertise that you're getting for free because I happen to see this contract on someone's desk. Most companies don't get that warning. The mining executive turned back and something in his expression had shifted. Harrison Pierce. He brought us this deal. Pushed hard for it. Said the Kazakhs were eager, that we needed to move fast or lose the opportunity. Harrison is under federal arrest for fraud, Walter said. We're reviewing all his contracts. Yours isn't the only problematic one. That information seemed to seal it. Maldonado looked at his team. Patricia, draft a termination letter. Marcus, calculate the loss. We're walking away. The relief in the room was palpable. But Evan felt no triumph, only exhaustion. He'd just saved a company from ruin, and somewhere in Brighton Beach, people were planning to hurt his daughter because of it. After Terravest left, Catherine pulled Evan aside. The consultant contract we discussed, 60,000 plus benefits. I'm raising it to 90, and we're adding a security stipend. Whatever you need to keep Ivy safe, the firm covers it. Catherine, that's too much. It's not enough, she interrupted. You just saved us from a negligence lawsuit and saved Terravest from bankruptcy. You're worth 10 times what we're paying. Take the deal, Evan. Use it to protect your daughter. Before he could respond, Renee appeared at the door, her face flushed with excitement. Evan, you need to see this, now. They followed her to a conference room where James and Miguel had set up a presentation. On the screen were 12 contracts, all from Harrison's client files, all flagged with Evan's linguistic markers. We went through everything, James said. Every international deal Harrison closed in the last 3 years. 12 of them have the same patterns you identified. Shell companies, jurisdictional confusion, liability traps. Miguel pulled up a spreadsheet. Combined, these contracts represent about $400 million in liability exposure for our clients. Companies that have no idea they're sitting on time bombs. Evan stared at the screen, the magnitude overwhelming. 12 companies. Hundreds of millions. How did nobody catch this? Because nobody was looking for it, Renee said. Because Harrison was a senior partner with a stellar reputation. Because the contracts looked sophisticated instead of suspicious. Because people like you were cleaning floors instead of reviewing documents. The implicit accusation hung in the air not against Evan, but against a system that had wasted his expertise for 15 years. We need to contact all 12, Catherine decided. Offer free contract review, explain the risks, help them exit if possible. That's going to cost us millions in returned fees, Walter warned. And it's going to save us our reputation, Catherine countered. This is our chance to do the right thing publicly, to show that Whitfield and Rowe stands for something more than just profit. Over the next week, Evan became the firm's de facto crisis manager. He reviewed all 12 contracts, ranked them by severity, and developed exit strategies for each client. Some were salvageable with renegotiation. Others required immediate termination, regardless of cost. The third contract he reviewed, a technology partnership with a Romanian company, revealed something that made his blood run cold. Buried in the data transfer provisions was language that would have given the Romanian partners access to the American company's entire customer database, including financial information. It wasn't just a bad deal, it was infrastructure for identity theft on a massive scale. "This is criminal," Evan told Torres when he called her from the secure office. Whoever designed this wasn't just stealing money. They were building a data harvesting operation. Torres was silent for a moment. "Send me everything. And Evan?" "The threat level just went up again. If you're uncovering a data theft network, these people are more dangerous than we thought." That night, Evan and Ivy moved to a new hotel under FBI protection. Their apartment was deemed too exposed. Ivy took it in stride, treating it like an adventure, but Evan could see the strain in her eyes. "When can we go home?" she asked as they unpacked in yet another generic hotel room. "Soon, sweetheart, as soon as it's safe." Will it ever be safe again? The question devastated him. "Yes, I promise. This won't last forever." But he wasn't sure he believed his own words. 2 weeks after the TerraVest meeting, the first major news broke. The Wall Street Journal ran a front-page story. Major law firm uncovers systemic fraud in international contracts. The article detailed how Whitfield and Rowe had discovered irregularities in multiple contracts, contacted affected clients, and was cooperating with federal authorities. Evan's name wasn't mentioned. Torres had ensured his identity remained protected. But the story was clear. Someone inside the firm had the expertise to spot what everyone else had missed. The response was immediate and divided. Some clients praised the firm's integrity. Others, spooked by the controversy, started moving their business elsewhere. The firm's revenue dropped 15% in a week. In an emergency partners meeting that Evan was invited to attend, his first as an official consultant, the tension was brutal. "We're hemorrhaging clients," one partner argued. "This transparency campaign is destroying us." "We're saving companies from bankruptcy," another countered. "That's our job." "Our job is to represent clients, not second-guess them," the first partner shot back. "If they want to sign risky contracts, that's their choice." Evan listened to the debate, understanding both sides. The firm was suffering for doing the right thing. People's jobs were at risk. Associates worried about bonuses. Partners saw their equity value declining. Finally, Catherine stood. "I want to read something." She pulled out a letter. "This arrived this morning from TerraVest's board of directors." She began reading, "Dear Whitfield and Rowe, on behalf of our 5,000 employees and their families, we thank you for preventing what would have been a catastrophic business decision. Your integrity saved our company. That kind of partnership is rare and invaluable. We are retaining you for all future international work." The room went quiet. Catherine continued, "We have 4 similar letters from other companies Evan helped. Yes, we lost some clients, but we gained something more important. We gained trust. And in the long run, trust is worth more than any single contract." The vote wasn't unanimous, but it was decisive. Whitfield and Rowe would continue the transparency initiative, would continue the contract review program, would continue supporting Evan's work regardless of short-term costs. After the meeting, Walter pulled Evan aside. "We're creating a new position. Director of Contract Forensics. It's yours if you want it. 90,000 full benefits, flexible schedule, and your own team. You'll train associates, review international contracts before signing, and work with the FBI as needed." Evan felt the weight of it. Director, his own team, real authority. What about the janitor work? Walter smiled slightly. You want to keep cleaning. 3 nights a week. It helps me think, and I learn more when people forget I'm there. Then 3 nights a week you clean. The rest of the time you direct. Deal. Evan shook his hand, feeling the surrealism of the moment. 6 weeks ago, he'd been invisible. Now he was directing a department. That evening, Ivy had her best day in months. Her latest treatment was working. Her color was better, her energy higher. When Evan picked her up from Sarah's impromptu art class, the associate had started teaching Ivy twice a week. His daughter was practically glowing. Look what I made. She held up a painting of the Whitfield and Row building, but this time it was surrounded by other buildings, all connected by bridges made of words. What are the bridges? Evan asked. The words you use to help people. Sarah said words can build bridges or walls, and you're building bridges. She pointed to tiny figures crossing the bridges. See, these are all the people you're saving. Evan's throat tightened. It's beautiful, sweetheart. I want to give it to the FBI lady, Agent Torres, because she's building bridges too. When they delivered the painting to Torres that weekend, the agent's eyes actually got damp. This is going on my office wall, she said to Ivy. Thank you. Then to Evan privately. We arrested 3 more people from Volkov's network, seized servers in Brighton Beach with evidence of the data theft operation you uncovered. The indictments are coming down next month. You're going to have to testify. I know. And when you do, your identity goes public. There's no avoiding it. The defense will want to discredit you, question your credentials, make you look like a janitor with delusions. Are you ready for that? Evan thought about it honestly. No, but I'll do it anyway. That's all being ready really means, Torres said. Doing it anyway. The indictments came in late November, 3 months after that first late-night confrontation. Volkov, whose real name turned out to be Viktor Sokolov, was charged with conspiracy to commit money laundering, wire fraud, and running a criminal enterprise. Harrison Pierce faced 15 counts of fraud and conspiracy. 23 other defendants spread across 6 countries were named in the massive federal case, and listed as a key witness, Dr. Evan Park, contract forensics expert. The media found him within hours. Reporters camped outside the hotel, outside Whitfield and Row, outside Ivy's school. The narrative was irresistible. Janitor brings down international crime ring, saves companies from bankruptcy, exposes corruption at prestigious law firm. Evan gave exactly 1 interview to a trusted journalist recommended by Torres. He kept it simple, factual, focused on the work rather than the drama. But he couldn't control how the story spread, how it morphed, how he became a symbol, whether he wanted to be or not. Through it all, Whitfield and Row stood by him. When one news outlet tried to paint him as a fraud, Catherine held a press conference with his Columbia credentials, his published research testimonials from former students. When another suggested he'd manufactured the crisis for attention, Walter released statements from the 12 companies Evan had helped, all confirming the severity of their contract issues. The firm was taking hits for supporting him. Some traditional clients didn't like the publicity, the controversy, the suggestion that their own lawyers might miss critical issues. But new clients appeared, 2 companies that wanted the kind of rigorous review Evan provided, that valued transparency over blind trust. By December, the firm had stabilized. Revenue was down 10%, but reputation was up significantly. And Evan's department officially launched with 2 junior associates, Sarah and Miguel, plus access to the NSA's Dr. Patel as a consulting linguist, was already reviewing contracts for 3 Fortune 500 companies. The night before Christmas Eve, Evan and Ivy finally moved back into their Queens apartment. The FBI had determined the threat level had decreased enough to allow it. Undercover protection would continue, but they could have their home back. As they unpacked, Ivy asked the question she'd been holding on to. After the trial, after you testify, will it be over? Evan sat beside her on the small couch. The trial might be over, but the work won't be. There are more contracts out there, more people like Volkov. It's not something you fix once and walk away from. So you're going to keep doing this. Keep being the person who sees what others miss. Yeah, I think so. Is that okay with you? Ivy considered it with her characteristic seriousness. Is it scary? Sometimes. But you taught me that scary doesn't mean wrong. I said that. You said brave is being scared and doing it anyway. She smiled. I'm pretty smart for a 12-year-old. You're pretty smart for any age. Evan pulled her close. I'm sorry things have been so crazy. I'm sorry you had to live in hotels and have FBI agents around and deal with all of this. I'm not sorry, Ivy said firmly. You're not sad anymore, Dad. You look like you again. Like the old pictures from before I got sick when you were at the university. That's worth being scared sometimes. The insight floored him. He'd been so focused on protecting her from the consequences of his choices that he hadn't considered she might actually support those choices, might be proud of them. Your mom would have liked seeing this, Evan said quietly. His wife had died when Ivy was 3, another casualty of the same autoimmune issues their daughter fought. She always said hiding from life was worse than facing it. Then we're doing what she would have wanted. That night, as Ivy slept peacefully in their too-small apartment with its thrift store furniture and medical equipment, Evan got an email from Dr. Patel. The NSA was formally offering him a position remote work consultant status, training their linguistic analysts to spot the patterns he'd identified. The pay was substantial, the work was meaningful, and it could all be done from home on his schedule around Ivy's needs. He wrote back a single word, yes. Then he opened his laptop and started writing the training manual he'd been planning, a comprehensive guide to contract forensics, linguistic pattern recognition, and how to spot criminal intent hiding in legal language. It would be used by Whitfield and Rowe, by the NSA, by the FBI. Eventually, he hoped by law schools teaching the next generation of attorneys to look beyond surface complexity to underlying truth. Around 2 a.m. his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You won, Park, this round. But the game isn't over. We adapt. We learn. We'll be back with patterns you won't recognize. Evan stared at the message for a long moment. Then he forwarded it to Torres and typed his response. I'll be ready. And I'll teach others to be ready too. You can't hide forever. He hit send and shut off his phone. The threat was real. The work would never truly be done. There would always be another Volkov, another scheme, another set of linguistic patterns designed to exploit and steal. But there would also be people like Evan, like Sarah, and Miguel, like Dr. Patel and Torres. People who paid attention, who questioned complexity, who refused to accept that too complicated to understand was an acceptable answer. The janitor who wasn't just a janitor had become the consultant who was also a director, also an expert witness, also a teacher. And somewhere in that evolution, he'd found the person he'd lost 15 years ago when fear and necessity had driven him into hiding. That person was still a father, first still shaped by Ivy's needs and love. But he was also someone who mattered beyond his small apartment, who influenced systems, who protected people he'd never meet from dangers they'd never see. As dawn broke over Queens on Christmas Eve, Evan finally allowed himself to believe it. The brave thing hadn't destroyed them. It had saved them both. And whatever came next, trials, threats, new schemes, new battles, they would face it together, neither of them hiding anymore. The trial began on a gray January morning, 6 months after Evan had set down his mop and changed everything. Federal Court, Southern District of New York was packed with journalists, law students, and representatives from the dozen companies Evan had saved. Viktor Sokolov sat at the defense table, looking smaller than Evan remembered his expensive suit, unable to disguise the defeated slump of his shoulders. Evan took the witness stand at 10 a.m., acutely aware of every eye in the courtroom. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Rachel Morrison, approached with a reassuring nod. Please state your name and occupation for the record, she began. Dr. Evan Park, Director of Contract Forensics at Whitfield and Rowe, and consultant to the National Security Agency's Linguistic Analysis Division. The defense attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Victoria Cross, made a note. Evan could already see her strategy forming: discredit the janitor question, the credentials make the expertise seem inflated. Morrison walked him through his background, methodically. Columbia University, 15 years of comparative international law, the linguistic framework he'd developed. Then, the night of November 3rd, the contract, the moment of recognition. Can you explain to the jury what you saw in that contract that 6 experienced attorneys missed? Morrison asked. Evan took a breath, remembering Torres's coaching. Speak to the jury, not the lawyers. Make it clear, make it human. Imagine you're reading a recipe, he began. It lists ingredients, gives you steps, tells you cooking time. But buried in step 7 in tiny print, it says, this dish may contain cyanide. That's what this contract did. It looked like instructions for a legitimate business partnership. But hidden in the legal language were clauses designed to steal money and destroy companies. One juror, an older woman in the front row, nodded understanding. Evan focused on her. The contract used something called jurisdictional layering, making 3 different countries' legal systems apply to different parts of the same agreement. That creates confusion, makes it almost impossible to know which rules apply when. And in that confusion, criminals hide their real intentions. He spent 2 hours on the stand that first day, walking through clause by clause, explaining patterns, showing the jury how language itself could be a weapon. Victoria Cross tried to rattle him during cross-examination, questioning why he'd left academia, suggesting his analysis was speculative, implying he'd fabricated expertise to escape janitorial work. Isn't it true, Dr. Park, she said with barely disguised contempt, that you were unemployed for 15 years before this convenient discovery? I was employed, Evan corrected calmly, as a custodian, cleaning offices at night to maintain health insurance for my daughter's medical treatments. And now you're suddenly an expert again, after 15 years of pushing a mop. I never stopped being an expert. I just stopped being visible. Evan met her eyes. Expertise doesn't disappear when you change jobs. It waits. And I spent those 15 years reading every contract left on every desk in that building. 5 years of free education in what real-world international business looks like. The answer landed perfectly. Even Victoria seemed to recognize she'd walked into it. When Evan left the stand that day, Morrison squeezed his shoulder. You did great. Jury's with you. But the trial was just beginning. Over the next 3 weeks, the prosecution built a massive case. FBI agents testified about the shell company network. Forensic accountants traced money flows through 6 countries. Dr. Patel explained linguistic pattern analysis to a fascinated jury. And one by one, representatives from the companies Evan had saved took the stand. Richard Maldonado from TerraVest was particularly powerful. Dr. Park's analysis saved my company from bankruptcy. 5,000 jobs that would have been lost. Families destroyed. All because Mr. Sokolov and his network designed contracts specifically to exploit our trust. The defense tried to argue that the contracts were merely complex, not criminal. That sophisticated businesses should understand what they sign. That nobody forced these companies to agree to unfavorable terms. But then, Harrison Pierce took the stand as a prosecution witness, having cut a deal to testify against the larger network. His appearance shocked the courtroom. The once proud partner now looked haggard, broken, desperate to salvage something from the wreckage of his career. I knew the contracts were problematic. Harrison admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Not the full extent, but I knew they were designed to benefit the foreign parties disproportionately. I pushed them through anyway because the fees were substantial and the clients trusted me. Did you ever alert your clients to the risks? Morrison asked. No. I told myself it wasn't my responsibility to second-guess their business judgment. But the truth is, I didn't want to lose the fees. Harrison looked at Evan in the gallery. When Park exposed the Volkov contract, I was angry because I knew it would unravel everything. All the deals I'd closed, all the questionable contracts I'd pushed through. I tried to intimidate him because I was protecting myself, not the firm or our clients. The admission was devastating. Victoria Cross tried to rehabilitate him on cross-examination, but the damage was done. The jury had seen inside the machine, understood how trusted advisors could become accomplices through willful blindness. During a recess in the third week, Evan stepped outside the courthouse for air and found himself face to face with Viktor Sokolov, flanked by marshals. The Russian looked at him with something like grudging respect. "You are very expensive, janitor," Sokolov said in heavily accented English. "Cost me many millions. Cost my associates their freedom." "You cost yourself," Evan replied. "I just read what you wrote. We will adapt, find new patterns you cannot see. Then I'll adapt too, and I'll teach others to see what I see." Evan stepped closer. "You think you're the first criminal to believe you're smarter than everyone else? The pattern isn't in the contracts, Victor. It's in the arrogance, and that never changes." Sokolov's smile faded. The marshals led him away, and Evan returned to the courtroom feeling something settle in his chest. This wasn't just about one case, one network, one trial. It was about establishing a principle that complexity wasn't a shield for crime, that expertise could exist anywhere, that speaking up mattered even when it was terrifying. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous on all counts. Guilty. Sokolov showed no emotion, but Evan felt the weight of 6 months lift from his shoulders. In the gallery, Ivy, who'd been allowed to attend the final day, squeezed his hand. "You did it, Dad," she whispered. "We did it," he corrected. Outside the courthouse, media swarmed. Evan gave a brief statement, drafted with Torres's help, thanking the FBI, the prosecution team, and Whitfield and Rowe. He mentioned the 12 companies saved. The network disrupted the importance of questioning complexity. He didn't mention his own role beyond being in the right place at the right time with the right knowledge. But the story wrote itself anyway. By that evening, the janitor who took down an international crime ring was trending on every news platform. Law schools were calling, asking him to lecture. Companies wanted to hire him for contract reviews. The NSA was expanding his consulting role. And in a quiet moment between interviews, Catherine pulled him aside. The partners voted unanimously. "We're creating the Park Protocol, a firm-wide requirement that all international contracts over $1 million get forensic review before signing. Your framework becomes our standard." Evan felt the significance of it. His name, his methodology embedded in the operations of a major law firm, not as a janitor, as an architect of integrity. Back at Whitfield and Rowe the following week, Evan found himself teaching his first official class. 15 associates filled the conference room, laptops, open notepads ready. Sarah and Miguel sat in the front row, having already learned the basics but wanting the formal training. Contract forensics isn't about being smarter than criminals, Evan began. It's about being more patient. They rely on you getting tired, getting overwhelmed by complexity, accepting that this is just how international business works. Your job is to never accept that. To read until you understand, to question until you're satisfied, to trust your instincts when something feels wrong. He walked them through real examples redacted for confidentiality, but devastating in their clarity. The Kazakhstan environmental trap. The Romanian data theft scheme. A new one he'd uncovered just last week, a pharmaceutical partnership that would have transferred valuable drug patents to a Chinese shell company through deliberately confusing IP assignment clauses. The pattern is always the same, he explained. Complexity as camouflage. Multiple jurisdictions to create confusion. Vague definitions that seem like flexibility but are actually traps. And most importantly, pressure to sign quickly before you can think it through. A young associate raised her hand. "How do you know when to dig deeper versus when you're just being paranoid?" "Trust the discomfort," Evan said. "If a clause makes you uncomfortable, there's usually a reason. Maybe it's legitimately complex and just needs clarification. Or maybe it's designed to make you uncomfortable enough to skip past it. Either way, the discomfort is data. Use it. After the class, James approached him. "This is incredible, Evan. You're changing how we think about our work." "I'm just teaching what I learned by accident." Evan demurred. "No, it's more than that. You're teaching us to see clients as people we protect, not just people who pay us. That's a culture shift." The culture shift was real and spreading. Over the next 6 months, Evan's department grew to include 5 full-time analysts and a rotating group of associates in training. They reviewed over 200 contracts, flagging issues in 43 of them, preventing an estimated $2 billion in potential losses. The work was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. Evan still kept his 3 nights a week as a janitor, still found insights in the quiet hours when offices were empty and papers were left unguarded. But now when attorneys found him cleaning, they'd stop to ask questions, share concerns about contracts, seek his opinion. The invisibility had transformed into a different kind of visibility, one where he could move between worlds, understood both the boardroom and the supply closet, spoke both legalese and plain truth. Ivy's health stabilized through the spring. The experimental treatment, fully covered by Evan's enhanced benefits package, was working better than anyone had hoped. She'd gained weight. Her color was good, her energy almost normal for a 13-year-old. The shadow that had haunted their lives for a decade was finally receding. One Saturday in June, they went to Central Park together, just walking and talking, like a normal father and daughter. Ivy had brought her sketchbook filling pages with scenes of the city. "Sarah asked if I wanted to intern at the firm this summer," she mentioned casually. "Help with art for presentations and stuff. Said she'd pay me." Evan stopped walking. "You're 13. You should be at summer camp, not working." "I like the firm. I like watching you teach people, and Sarah's cool." Ivy looked up at him with those 2 wise eyes. "Besides, someone has to make sure you don't work all the time." "I don't work all the time. Dad, you read contracts for fun now." He couldn't argue with that. "Okay, but only part-time. And you're still doing art camp 2 weeks in August." "Deal." She went back to sketching, but Evan caught the smile on her face. His daughter, who'd spent too much of her childhood in hospitals, was choosing to spend her summer around law offices and contract reviews, because that's where he was, where the work mattered, where she could be part of something bigger than illness and fear. In July, the European branch of Sokolov's network was finally exposed. Interpol raids across 6 countries netted 23 arrests, seized servers containing thousands of contracts, and revealed that the scheme had been operating for over a decade. The linguistic patterns Evan had identified became the key to linking all the disparate operations together. Dr. Patel called him with the news. "Your framework just took down one of the largest white-collar crime networks in European history. The EU is asking if you'll consult on their investigation." "I'm a consultant for the US government and a law firm," Evan said, feeling overwhelmed. "I can't take on Europe too." "Then train someone. Share the methodology. You've created something that works, Evan. It needs to spread beyond just you." The idea germinated. What if he didn't have to do it all himself? What if he could create a system, a training program, a framework that others could use? Not just at Whitfield and Rowe or the NSA, but anywhere contracts were signed and complexity was used as a weapon. He spent August writing. Not just a training manual, but a comprehensive book on contract forensics, linguistic pattern analysis, and how to spot criminal intent in legal language. It was part textbook, part memoir, part call to action. He wrote about his 15 years in the shadows, about what he'd learned from invisibility, about the importance of speaking up, especially when nobody expected you to. Sarah and Miguel helped with research and examples. Dr. Patel contributed chapters on computational linguistics. Torres wrote a foreword about the investigation. Catherine provided case studies with client permission. By September, Complex Words, Simple Crimes, A Janitor's Guide to Contract Forensics was complete. The title had been Ivy's suggestion. Own it, she'd said. The janitor part is what makes you different, what makes people listen. She was right. When the book published in October released simultaneously as an academic text and a popular business book, it became an unexpected bestseller. Law schools adopted it for their curriculum. FBI training programs incorporated it. International regulatory agencies requested copies, and Evan found himself invited to speak at conferences, universities, government agencies. Not as a curiosity or a feel-good story, but as an expert whose work was reshaping how institutions thought about contracts and complexity. The first anniversary of that November night arrived with surprising quietness. Evan marked it by taking the late shift as a janitor cleaning the same conference room where it had all started. The building was different now. He was different, but the work of cleaning still grounded him, still gave him perspective. Around midnight, Renee found him there. "Knew you'd be here tonight," she said. "Seemed appropriate. Catherine wants to make you a partner. Full equity voting rights, the whole thing. She's calling a vote next month." Evan stopped mopping. "A partner? I've been here barely a year as a consultant." "You've transformed the firm's entire approach to international work. Saved us from Harrison's corruption. Built a department from nothing. Written a book that's changing the profession." Renee smiled. "Plus, you still mop floors, which is the kind of humility we need in leadership." "I don't know if I want to be a partner. The politics, the pressure, the responsibility. You're already handling the responsibility. This just formalizes it and gives you a real voice in firm decisions." She paused. "You've earned this, Evan, not because of one dramatic night, but because of everything you've done since." The vote happened in December. Unanimous approval. Evan Park became the first person in Whitfield & Rowe's 100-year history to go from janitor to partner. The ceremony was small, just the partners and Ivy, who wore her best dress and looked impossibly proud. "This feels surreal," Evan admitted to Walter as they signed the partnership papers. "Get used to it. Your life is surreal now." Walter handed him a key. "Corner office on 43, Catherine's orders. Said you've earned a window." The corner office felt excessive, but Evan accepted it. He filled it with the tools of both his identities: legal texts and cleaning supplies, framed diplomas, and his old janitor uniform hanging in the closet as a reminder. When clients came for consultations, they'd see both sides of him, understand that expertise came from unexpected places. By the second anniversary, the impact was undeniable. The Park Protocol had been adopted by 17 major law firms. Contract forensics was now taught at 32 law schools. The FBI had created a dedicated unit using Evan's methodology, and the European Union had successfully prosecuted the remaining Sokolov Network members with Evan's linguistic framework as the cornerstone of their case. But the numbers that mattered most to Evan were smaller, more personal. Ivy had been treatment-free for 6 months, her autoimmune markers at their lowest levels ever. She was thriving in school, making friends, living the normal teenage life he'd dreamed of giving her. The fear that had driven every decision for 15 years was finally genuinely easing. One evening in late November, 3 years after it all began, Evan and Ivy sat in their small Queens apartment, which they'd kept despite being able to afford something bigger. Some things were worth keeping, worth remembering. "Dad, I got accepted to the summer law program at Columbia," Ivy announced, looking up from her laptop. "The one for high school students interested in legal careers." Evan felt his throat tighten. "You want to study law?" "Maybe, or maybe linguistics, or both." She grinned. "Turns out watching your dad catch criminals with grammar is pretty inspiring." "You could do anything. You don't have to follow my path." "I'm not following your path. I'm making my own. But yeah, I want to understand how language works, how words can help people or hurt them. You taught me that matters." Later, after Ivy had gone to bed, Evan stood at the window looking out at Queens, the neighborhood where he'd hidden for 15 years, where he'd believed himself diminished and defeated. From here, the city looked the same as it always had. but everything else had changed. His phone buzzed. A message from Torres. New case. Possible contract fraud network operating out of Dubai. Need your analysis. Interested. Another from Dr. Patel. Teaching contract forensics at NSA Academy next month. Want to co-lecture. Another from an unknown number. Dr. Park, I'm a solo practitioner who just read your book. I think I've been sitting on a fraudulent contract for 6 months. Can you help? Evan smiled, typing rapid responses. Yes to Torres. Yes to Dr. Patel. Yes to the solo practitioner who'd probably just saved their client because they'd learned to recognize the patterns. The work would never end. There would always be another scheme, another network, another set of criminals who believed complexity made them untouchable. But there would also always be people willing to do the hard work of understanding, of questioning, of standing up, even when it was terrifying. People like Evan. And now, thanks to his framework and his book and his willingness to teach people like Sarah and Miguel and the 15 associates he'd trained and the 32 law schools teaching his methodology and the solo practitioner who'd just asked for help. The janitor who saw what others missed had become the teacher who helped others see. And in that transformation, he'd found not just professional success or personal vindication, but something more fundamental. Purpose that aligned with capability. Work that mattered beyond any paycheck, and proof that expertise wasted was expertise waiting, not expertise lost. 3 years ago, Renee Hale had said, "Anyone who can translate this can have my salary." She'd meant it as frustrated sarcasm. Instead, it had become an invitation to step into the light, to matter, to use 15 years of accumulated knowledge for something more than just survival. Evan picked up Ivy's latest drawing from the coffee table, a self-portrait of her in a law library, surrounded by books, with a small figure of him in the corner, holding both a mop and a gavel. The caption read, "My dad sees invisible things." He'd spent 15 years being invisible himself, believing that was the price of keeping his daughter alive. And he'd been wrong. The price of keeping her alive and keeping himself whole was visibility, was using the gifts he'd been given, was trusting that speaking up wouldn't destroy them, but might actually save them both. As Evan settled into bed that night, he felt something he hadn't felt in 15 years. Contentment. Not happiness exactly, because the work was too hard and the threats too real for simple happiness, but a deep satisfaction that he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. Tomorrow, he'd review contracts and teach associates and consult with the FBI. Next week, he'd give a keynote speech at an international law conference. Next month, he'd start working on his second book, this one focused on training the next generation of contract forensics specialists. But tonight, he was just a father in a small apartment in Queens, listening to his daughter breathe easily in sleep, knowing that the brave thing he'd done 3 years ago had led to this moment. This peace, this purpose, this proof that one person speaking up could change everything. The janitor who became a consultant, who became a director, who became a partner, had finally become simply himself. Dr. Evan Park, who happened to clean floors 3 nights a week because that's where he thought best, who'd written a best-selling book from a hotel room, while his daughter drew pictures of buildings made of words, who'd proved that expertise could exist anywhere, and invisibility was a choice, not a sentence. And somewhere in Manhattan, in a corner office on the 43rd floor of Whitfield and Row, his janitor uniform hung in a closet next to his partner's suits, both equally important, both equally real, both equally him. The complex words would keep hiding simple crimes. But Evan Park would keep finding them, keep exposing them, keep teaching others to see what he saw. Because that was the job now. Not just catching criminals, but building a system where criminals couldn't hide in complexity anymore, where expertise was recognized, regardless of job title, where speaking up was rewarded instead of punished. One janitor, one contract, one moment of courage. That's all it had taken to start an avalanche. And 3 years later, that avalanche was still rolling, gathering momentum, changing how an entire profession thought about their work. Not bad for a guy who just wanted to keep his daughter alive. Not bad at all.